She stood motionless in the middle of the room, as if the world had stopped around her. Everyone was laughing. The simple dress she had sewn herself, with cheap fabric and hand-embroidered flowers, was now the butt of jokes. The cell phone cameras were unforgiving. "Is that a bedsheet?" shouted an influencer, while he, the heir to the largest hotel chain in the country, laughed out loud and raised his champagne glass. Who invited the dry cleaner? She felt her face burn. There was nowhere to hide. She didn't even have a way out. She was wearing her deceased mother's holy shoes. At that moment, faced with the ironic applause and looks of contempt, she lowered her eyes. But no one knew what she would do when she left there, and even less, what would happen the next morning, when the smiling faces from that party would end up on the front pages of the newspapers, but not for a celebration. The next morning, the newspapers carried a headline that no one expected. "Young woman risks her life and saves child from orphanage fire." The image of her, wearing the same burnt dress from the night before, and her eyes filled with soot and smoke, circulated throughout the country. Her heroic gesture went viral. She had only stopped by the party to leave a fundraising invitation for the orphanage where she grew up, and left when she heard about the fire. She was the one who went in, while everyone filmed from afar. She saved the child, and even went back to get important documents. Now, while he woke up with swollen eyes and messages demanding explanations about the video in which he ridiculed her, she was invited for interviews, received tributes from the fire department, and had her name engraved on the entrance to the rebuilt orphanage. The dress that had been the butt of jokes would become a symbol of national courage, and while he tried to hide his shame, the entire country already knew who she was. If this story has kept you hooked so far, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. It's only going to get worse. The night was too bright for someone like her. The room was all glass, reflecting the golden lights from the ceiling and the chandeliers that hung like crystals suspended in time. Waiters glided like shadows among the guests, while the background music mixed instrumental jazz with laughter, muffled by crystal glasses. It was the closing party of a conference of international investors, hosted by the Hastings, one of the most influential families in California. Among them was the most talked-about heir of the last season, Brandon Hastings, 28 years old, direct heir to the family hotel empire, young, handsome, arrogant. He was surrounded by models, influencers, businessmen, people who revolved around him as if he were a son. The atmosphere was one of celebration and of showing off. At the entrance, a young woman hesitated for a few seconds before crossing the carpet that led to the main hall. Her name was Emily, and the dress she was wearing was not a designer dress, nor was it custom-made, nor was it rented for the occasion. She had sewn it herself, a light blue shade, fabric purchased at a local haberdashery, with small flowers hand-embroidered, one by one, at night, after work. She took a deep breath. She knew she was not invited, but she had been allowed in only to deliver an invitation for the charity campaign of the orphanage where she lived. The staff at the entrance, confused by her security, allowed her to pass. Emily walked with the envelope in her hands, avoiding the surprised looks, trying to remain invisible. But Brandon noticed her. With a glass in his hand, eyes half closed and a cynical smile, he observed her as if he were seeing a mistake in the landscape, a mistake that at the same time was too amusing to ignore. She didn't realize she was already the center of attention until she heard the first muffled laugh. She tried to hurry up, but her borrowed heels caught on the carpet. When she approached the central table, someone deliberately bumped into her. The invitation fell. They laughed. She ducked, and when she stood up, the flashes were on. Brandon raised his voice, with that tone that everyone around him already knew, mocking, performative, cruel. "Will someone tell Cinderella she lost her horse?" The laughter multiplied. An influencer's camera turned to her. Emily just breathed. She handed the envelope to the nearest waiter without saying anything. She glanced at Brandon, not angrily, but as if she already knew, and then he turned around, with calm steps, as if each of them carried something stronger than shame, as if she carried with her not just a simple dress, but something that no one there could yet understand. And when she left, no one imagined what would happen in the next few hours, even less that that silent woman would be the only one everyone would remember when they woke up. Emily never had an ordinary childhood. She grew up in the narrow hallways of an old orphanage in the interior of California, where the rusty iron beds creaked with stories that no one wanted to hear. Her mother left her when she was 4 years old, with a crumpled note pinned to her coat saying only, "She deserves more than I can give." She never heard her father. He never heard a voice calling his name outside on visiting days. She grew up learning to keep quiet, to share everything, even the things that hurt. And it was there, between the worn cotton sheets and the cold hallways, that she discovered what love was. Not the romantic kind you see in the movies, but the love that grows between children who care for each other because no one else will. Emily learned to sew because she would tear her own dresses on the branches in the yard. She learned to cook because no one wanted to eat what they served, and she learned to smile silently, just so as not to make others sad too. At 16, she left the orphanage and went to live with a lady she had met in the neighborhood. In exchange for a cramped room in the back of the house, he took care of the garden and helped with the cleaning. That was where the life she called just mine began. She washed clothes during the day, studied at night, and sewed when she had time. The years passed and she held no grudges or resentment, only a constant longing for what she never had. When she learned that the orphanage was in danger of closing, she was the first to act. She created an online profile, started a campaign, sewed cloth bags to sell, and personally visited fundraising events, until she heard about a party where the biggest businessmen in the region would be gathered. She asked the lady who was sheltering her for help. She sewed a dress with fabric left over from a rejected request. He hitchhiked to the city, all so she could hand-deliver the invitation that might save the orphanage that saved her. She didn't know who Brandon Hastings was until she saw his name on the event banner. She looked it up on her old cell phone while she waited outside. He was famous, a millionaire, the son of the woman who had once donated to the orphanage, a detail she only discovered when she arrived. The name sounded too distant to make sense. But Emily wasn't there for names. She was there because of the children who still slept where she had slept, who were still waiting for someone to care. She thought about going in, handing them over, and leaving. That was it. But life has a strange way of drawing circles where we thought there were straight lines, and even though she had prepared herself for the worst, even though she had rehearsed silent responses to subtle slights, Emily didn't foresee what was coming, or that the dress, made with so much hope, would be ripped away from her by eyes that had never known the value of hand-sewn courage. Brandon was bored. It wasn't that he was unhappy, but he had learned to live numb to his own privileges. The events all seemed the same. The same. Fake smiles, the same proposals disguised as kindness, the same looks of greed behind the dark lenses of the guests. For him, humiliating someone was more of a pastime than a conscious evil. It was part of the game, of the scene that revolved around his name, as if he were the protagonist of a theater where everyone just wanted a full audience. That night, everything was the same as always, until she walked in. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. A girl alone, in an outdated dress, and a firm gaze, walking among glasses and tailored suits, as if she had every right in the world to be there. That was, at the very least, curious. At the most, unforgivable. It was then that one of his friends, Colin, whispered in a mocking tone, "Let's see if the prince of the party still knows how to joke." Brandon understood the message. That was how it worked between them. There was always a bet, a provocation, a challenge hidden behind every gesture. And Emily, with her strange dress and her disconcerting serenity, became the target this time. "I bet you can't get a tear out of her," Colin said. "If I can, you can give me the new watch from the Arabian collection." Brandon smiled, raised his eyebrow, and accepted. Because for him, at that moment, she was just another distraction. Another piece in the game of vanity. I had no idea that I was about to lose much more than an expensive watch. Emily was approaching the central table when the plan began. Brandon stepped out of the Circle crossed the room and signaled for one of the waiters to stop right next to her. She didn't even notice she was focused on not dropping the invitation she was carrying. That's when the glass of red wine tipped over, as if by accident, and stained a part of the dress she had spent weeks sewing. Brandon feigned astonishment. "Oh, I'm sorry. What a waste. Of wine, of course." The laughter came quickly. Someone took a picture. Emily looked at her own body, stained red, and took a deep breath. She didn't say anything. She just looked down and tried to wipe it off with a tissue. Brandon didn't stop. "You know what's funny? That looks exactly like the curtains at the hotel in Nevada. Did she break into the laundry room and cosplay as a noblewoman?" The friends laughed even louder. Emily, however, remained silent. What was supposed to be a joke that lasted a few seconds turned into a cruel sequence. Brandon approached and said something that only she heard. "I can break you in 3 sentences. Want to see?" But before she said the first one, she looked him in the eyes for the first time. And there was no fear there, no shame. There was something older, as if she had known this type of person forever, as if she was just watching a pattern repeat itself. Brandon felt uncomfortable for a second that he couldn't explain, but he persisted in the bet. And that's why he didn't stop, even when it was no longer funny, even when the room went silent, because some laughter, even disguised, is louder than any music. Emily was gripping the envelope so tightly that her fingers were white. The paper was wrinkling, but she didn't notice. This night wasn't about her, and yet everything seemed to revolve around her presence. When Brandon approached her a second time with the same tilted smile and the look of someone who had already won, she didn't look away. She could smell his expensive perfume, hear his muffled laugh behind his perfect teeth, but she didn't move. He was feigning kindness now. He picked up 2 glasses, offering one to her as if it were a noble gesture. "Did you come alone or did someone leave you at the door?" he asked, leaning down to be at her level. Emily accepted the glass, not to drink, but so that he wouldn't touch her again. "I just came to deliver something. I'm leaving now," she said, her voice too firm for what was expected of her. Brandon frowned in surprise. "Deliver what? A resume?" She held out the envelope. "It's an invitation for a fundraising campaign. The orphanage where I grew up is closing, and they say the Hastings have a good heart." That caught him off guard. Brandon laughed, but lightly, trying to keep his charm. "You're bold, you know, walking in like that. At an event like this, just to ask for money, it's almost poetic." Emily didn't answer. She just handed the envelope to a waiter who was passing by and turned to leave. But he didn't let her. He touched her arm with a cynical lightness. "Wait, I haven't even told you my name yet." She stopped, her back to him. "You don't have to." And she kept walking, even with everyone's eyes fixed on her back. Brandon followed her with his eyes. He felt something strange. This woman wasn't like the others. And the fact that she hadn't begged, that she hadn't cried, that she hadn't flinched at his jokes, it bothered him. Later, he would see her on the other side of the room, sitting alone for a few minutes, waiting for a ride-sharing driver, who would cancel twice. She looked at her old cell phone with its cracked screen and checked her messages. Brandon, watching from afar, had another glass of wine and approached with a new plan in mind. "Want a ride?" he asked, as if offering the world. Emily just shook her head. "I'd rather walk," and smiled, a small but firm smile. Brandon was speechless. For the first time in a long time, someone had calmly refused him. No fight, no scene, no emotion. He watched her disappear through the glass door. No one was paying attention anymore. The party had already changed direction, but Brandon couldn't forget the way she walked to the exit, as if nothing there mattered. Outside, Emily felt the cold wind blowing on her face. Her dress was still stained, but inside she felt a strange peace. She didn't feel humiliated. She felt that she had done what she had to do, that even though she had faced everyone's contempt inside, what she carried in her heart was even greater. The child she had. Ben would one day be proud of what she had done, and it was for that child and for the others who still slept in that orphanage that she would not let herself be bent by anyone, not by Brandon, not by all the wealth in the world. The next morning, the video was already circulating in 3 WhatsApp groups and was on the feed of one of the influencers covering the event. A quick video, taken by someone from the sound team, showed Brandon making jokes about Emily's dress, while she remained motionless, holding the envelope. The comments were unforgiving. Some laughed, others criticized, but everyone shared it. Her face, serious and unresponsive, contrasted with Brandon's open laughter. The cut of the video did not show the context, only the cruelest part. And that was enough to fuel the flames of virtual mockery. When Brandon woke up, he had already received 4 messages from his image consultant and 2 missed calls from his mother. He scrolled through his feed and saw what he didn't want to see. His own voice saying, "That looks like a cheap motel bedsheet," with thousands of likes, reposts and comments like, "Arrogance has a name. The rich man who thinks he owns the world. I'm disgusted by people like that." Emily, on the other hand, woke up unaware that half the city already knew her. She had slept badly, worried about the failure to deliver the invitation. She thought that nothing would come of it. She went back to her silent routine. She made coffee for the lady who was welcoming her, fed the cats in the garden and organized the fabrics in the corner of the room. It was only after lunch, when she went out to deliver some custom-made bags, that she heard her first reaction. A woman at the bus stop recognized her and said, "You're the girl in the video, aren't you? That was humiliating, but you looked so dignified. What a woman!" Emily smiled without understanding. She only realized the full extent of it when she saw the video on a second-hand cell. Phone displayed in a store window. Her face, the dress, the glass of wine, Brandon laughing. It was all there. And below, the comments. But she didn't cry, nor did she feel angry. She just remained silent, watching what the world did with a story that had only been half told. Meanwhile, at the Hastings mansion, the atmosphere was tense. Brandon tried to minimize the damage. He called influencers offering reconciliation partnerships, wrote clarification notes that sounded cold and studied. But nothing worked. The public had already decided. Emily was a symbol of dignity, and he the portrait of contempt that people no longer wanted to accept. That same day, she received a message from a TV producer. They wanted to interview her, tell her version, talk about the orphanage. Emily refused, not out of fear, but out of principle. She knew that it would all pass, that what really mattered had not yet changed. The orphanage needed help, and she did not want to become a celebrity of pain. She wanted real solutions. While the world screamed her name, she remained silent. And in that silence, her figure grew more than any trending topic. Brandon, meanwhile, lost endorsement deals. He was called toxic by a famous ex-girlfriend, and even his own mother gave him a lecture that ended with an unexpected sentence. "You ridiculed a girl who only wanted to save children. I hope this embarrasses you more than any meme." And for the first time in a long time, Brandon had no answer. He sat in his room, the same one where he had planned the joke the night before, now surrounded by screens showing his own face frozen in the moment the world turned against him. 3 days after the party, while the dust had not yet settled on the networks, Emily walked discreetly to the orphanage. She carried bags with fabrics, notebooks, some toys, and a simple cake that she had prepared at dawn. It was the birthday of one of the girls who still lived there, and Emily made a point of celebrating as if it were a big party. When she arrived, she was greeted with a group hug, as always. But there was something different that day. The caregivers looked at her with tenderness, mixed with astonishment. One of them showed her the day's newspaper, her photo on the cover with the caption, "The girl who silenced an empire with a hand-sewn dress." Emily didn't smile. She just shook her head. "It wasn't the dress. It was what I didn't say," she replied. And it was true. From the moment she entered that room, she knew that she could be ridiculed. She knew what was expected of someone like her in a world like that, but she didn't react. She didn't cry. She didn't beg, because she knew what Brandon was doing, and she let him. She let him because deep down, she was already prepared. That night before going to the party, Emily heard from one of the children at the orphanage, "Auntie Emmy, if anyone laughs at your dress, Pretend you're a superhero in disguise. She took that phrase with her, and that's exactly how she felt, like someone with a greater purpose. Brandon was predictable. His contempt, his looks, his arrogance, she'd seen it all before in other versions, other faces, other places. But no one would have guessed that she'd read it all before she walked in. She heard the bet. She was close enough when Colin said it. She saw the look between them. She knew she would be provoked. Still, she went in. Because the invitation needed to be delivered. And because inside her there was a calm that no one there would be able to destroy. She wasn't caught off guard. She chose not to react. She chose to be bigger than anyone expected. Later, when the invitations were printed for a new fundraiser, one of the sponsors used an image of her as the campaign's symbol. The moment she held the envelope surrounded by laughter and cameras, staring straight ahead. No one knew she had heard it all, that she had read the looks, felt the laughter before it even began. She had not fallen into a trap. She had walked through it with the dignity of someone who knew the way, and that, for Brandon, would be the hardest revelation, because the truth was, he had never deceived her. He had never defeated her. She had let him think he was in control, when in reality, she knew the end of the story before she even set foot in that room. What seemed like a public humiliation was actually a silent surrender, a chosen sacrifice, and what the world interpreted as weakness was, in essence, a strength. Brandon had never known. Emily went home that night knowing she had done the right thing, and as she saw the orphanage being sought after by donors, businessmen, and television networks, she realized that her silence had screamed louder than any revenge. Brandon couldn't sleep. The video, the comments, the stares from inside his own house, it all weighed on him. But there was one thing he couldn't shake from his mind, her gaze. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was as if she already knew. As if what he'd done had no power over her whatsoever. It ate at him inside. Why hadn't she fought back? Why hadn't she screamed, cried, fought back? And most of all, why was he still thinking about her? For years, Brandon had used contempt as a tool of control. He knew how to make others uncomfortable. He knew how to be cruel with class. But with Emily, nothing worked. And what was supposed to be a one-night stand became a stain on his image, and worse, a constant presence in his memory. He needed to know more. He went to the office of his mother's philanthropic foundation to look for documents. He found the name of the orphanage where Emily said she had grown up. And then, among old folders, he found a black and white photo, a charity event many years ago, where his mother, as a young girl, had given toys to small children. In the background, a little girl with wide eyes holding a teddy bear, the same one that had been displayed on a shelf at the orphanage when he saw the video in the newspaper. Brandon froze. It was Emily. The girl he had humiliated had once been one of his own mother's wards, and that wasn't all. Inside the folder was a handwritten letter signed by the orphanage's director at the time. Emily D. has shown a talent for sewing, reading, and leadership with the other children. Mrs. Hastings has mentioned the possibility of sponsorship if her family situation does not improve. Brandon felt the ground shift. His family had almost adopted Emily. His mother knew her. And perhaps at some point he had seen her himself as a child. Distant memories filled him. An afternoon at the orphanage when he was 7, handing out candy with his mother. There was a girl who didn't smile, who stood, clutching her gift tightly. It came back to him like a flash. It was her. The same firmness. The same silence. Emily wasn't just some stranger. She was part of a past he had erased, that his family had shelved. And now, that past was coming back with a force he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a poor girl in a strange dress. She was a witness of everything he had forgotten or pretended not to remember. Her silence now took on another dimension. She knew who he was. She knew what that last name meant. And yet, she went there. Not to ask, but to deliver. Brandon sat in the office chair, holding the yellowed photo. For the first time, he didn't feel like a Hastings. He felt small, fragile, faced with a truth that he had mocked without knowing. Emily didn't just know. She carried the memory, the bond, the story, and she had chosen silence when she could have exposed everything. He was the one who put himself in his own judgment, and she, without saying anything, simply allowed him to show who he really was. Emily disappeared, not from the newspapers but from their reach. She refused interviews, declined invitations to television programs, avoided responding to the thousands of emails and messages that arrived every day. The phone rang non-stop, but she let it ring. The lady who took her in said that the world wanted to turn her into a symbol, a magazine cover, a spectacle. But Emily didn't want applause. She wanted solutions. With the silent help of anonymous donors who were moved by her story, she managed to raise the money needed to keep the orphanage running for another year. What did you do with that? You bought new mattresses, repaired the roof, ordered books for the small library, organized sewing classes for the older girls. You didn't tell anyone about it. You didn't post it on social media. You didn't make any statements. You just lived the purpose that had always driven you. Brandon, on the other hand, couldn't get back into his routine. He searched for her in vain. He called the orphanage and offered to donate anonymously, but was turned down. He sent flowers with discreet notes, never answered. He tried to see her outside the school where she taught tutoring on Saturdays, but she didn't show up. And the more he searched, the more he felt an emptiness he couldn't name. It wasn't guilt, at least not the kind that can be solved by giving. It was a strange, new feeling, as if he had lost something that had never been his. The image of her at the party, even surrounded by mockery, came back to him in his dreams. And now he understood. What bothered him wasn't what she said, but everything she chose not to say. As her name continued to be remembered in the headlines, Emily retreated further into herself. She stopped, wearing the stained dress, and put it away, folded and carefully cleaned, in a box that she sealed with a blue ribbon. It wasn't out of trauma. It was out of respect. That dress had served its purpose. It was no longer needed. And with it, she also began to let go of everything that connected her to the party episode. To the world, it was the moment she was humiliated and became a heroine. To her, it was the moment she came full circle. She no longer had to prove anything, not to Brandon, not to herself. But he wouldn't give up. Each day without an answer was a needle piercing his ego, and for the first time in his life, it wasn't out of pride. It was out of real regret. He wanted to see her, hear her voice, understand how she could be so much bigger than everything. He didn't know how to ask for forgiveness, or if she deserved it. He just wanted to be able to say, "I get it." But Emily had learned to live beyond the reach of those who only saw her as something to be conquered. And that included him. The more Brandon tried to reach her, the more untouchable she became, as if she were already somewhere else, as if she had already crossed a bridge that he was only now beginning to build. The next few weeks were relentless. Brandon began to feel something he had never felt before, real judgment. Meetings that had once been filled with rote praise were now met with sidelong glances and awkward silences. An international sponsor pulled out of a contract, citing differences in values. An influencer network that promoted the family's hotels cancelled partnerships after pressure from followers. The Hastings name, once synonymous with prestige, began to be associated with the word arrogance. The video featuring Emily was edited countless times by content creators. In one, the soundtrack was soft, and the slow motion showed the exact moment she received the glass of wine and the red stain spread. Her face was peaceful. His was mocking. The title of the video, "The Woman Who Didn't Have to Say a Word to Embarrass the Entire Country." Brandon locked himself away for days. He wouldn't answer calls. He wouldn't meet. His mother confronted him. She said the family's public image was at risk, but what hurt the most was hearing her say, "You managed to tarnish the name of someone who only wanted to help children. This isn't about the company, Brandon. This is about character." For the first time, he had no answer, because she was right, and he knew it. He tried to write a public apology letter, But every sentence sounded forced. Nothing seemed enough because nothing really was. Brandon no longer wanted to clean up his image. He wanted to go back in time. He wanted to undo it. But words spoken cannot be erased. Laughter cannot be retracted. The echo of what he had done now came back in the form of humiliation, silent but constant. At a social event, he was approached by an elegant lady who had been complimenting him since he was a child. This time she simply said, "I never thought I would see a Hastings make fun of a girl who was full of courage." And she turned her back. Brandon felt his face burn. In the hallways of his own company, employees avoided his gaze. In elevators, the silence was thick. The new generation openly criticized him on social media. He was the portrait of what no one wanted to see anymore, dehumanized privilege. The irony was clear. He, who had so often used contempt to keep others small, was now being diminished in every space he had once dominated with ease. The press began to publish investigative reports about the family's foundation. Small failures in accounting became scandals. Everything that had been untouched began to be scrutinized. Brandon tried to fight back, but he had no more breath. He realized belatedly that falling doesn't come with a push. It comes with the weight of the truth. And the truth was in every frame of that video. Emily, in a simple dress and with steady hands, exposed everything he was without saying a single word. And the world understood. Every time someone shared that moment, it was like saying, "We know." And Brandon began to wonder if he would ever be able to look in the mirror without seeing that night reflected in his own reflection. Brandon began to disappear from his own parties. He stopped attending high society events, stopped posing for photos, declined invitations, and cancelled trips. His schedule became empty, but for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt necessary. He began to walk alone in neighborhoods he'd never visited. He walked down ordinary streets, sat in small cafes, observed people who didn't know who he was. And in that rare anonymity, he began to listen. He heard conversations about overdue bills, sick children, uncertain jobs. He realized that the real world had nothing to do with the glass ballrooms where he felt like a king. The world Emily had entered in her hand-sewn dress seemed closer to the truth than anything he'd ever experienced before. One of those days he returned to the orphanage. He didn't tell anyone. He just walked over to the gate and stood outside watching. The children were playing in the yard. Some were tending the garden, others were drawing on the ground with colored chalk. He didn't see Emily, but he saw a girl with her hair tied back, very similar to the child in the old photo he had found in the office. He felt a lump in his throat. He thought about going in, but something stopped him. In his pocket he carried an envelope. In it a check, not for an exaggerated amount, but enough to cover part of the expenses for 6 months, signed with another name. He didn't want credit. He didn't want headlines. He just wanted, in some way, to rebuild something of what he had helped to hurt. At home he began to change routines. He read foundation reports that he had never read before. He called the directors of old social projects and asked for meetings with communities that had been ignored. Little by little, he stopped being the heir who gave orders from afar and became the man who listened. He began to work in silence. Anonymous donations. Reforms were initiated. Visits were made without the press. And in the midst of all this, he began to write. Not a book nor a public letter, but personal letters, one every day, all addressed to Emily. He wrote as a way of understanding what she meant, what she had awakened in him, what she had shown him, without needing to say. And in her absence, he found answers that he had not dared to seek before. Brandon began to see his own story in a different light. He realized that he wasn't just a privileged man who had made a mistake. He was someone who had never been taught to recognize value beyond appearance. Emily taught him this without lessons, without ready-made phrases, without confrontations. She taught him with presence, with firmness, with absence. It was in the emptiness she left that Brandon found what he had always sought in arrogance meaning. And for the first time, he didn't want applause or public redemption. He just wanted that if he ever saw her again, he could say, "I'm not the same anymore, and that's because of you." Her dress, now immortalized in images and in the national memory, had become a symbol of resistance. But for him, it was more than that. It was a living reminder that there is dignity in silence and power in those who know how to keep quiet at the right time. Brandon began to look at himself with less pride and more truth, and in this process, someone began to be born who perhaps finally deserved to be remembered for something other than the surname he carried. It was on a cloudy morning, almost 2 months after the party, that he found her again. Brandon was sitting on a worn wooden bench in the small park near the orphanage, with a coffee in his hands and one of the letters in his pocket. It was the only place where I still felt the world slow down. The cool air, the falling leaves, the sounds of children playing in the distance, everything seemed less harsh there. When he looked to the side, she was already there, sitting on the other end of the same bench, with a book on her lap. She was wearing a thick sweater, a simple scarf, and her hair tied up in an unpretentious way. You didn't notice her presence. She was focused on reading, like someone enjoying a few minutes of peace before returning to the whirlwind of every day. Life. Brandon hesitated. For a few seconds he thought about getting up and leaving, but he stayed. He watched in silence. After a few minutes, she looked up and saw him. There was no shock, no surprise, just a long moment where their eyes met, and for the first time no words seemed necessary. Emily calmly closed the book, squared her shoulders and looked at him. He took a deep breath. He took the letter out of his pocket and placed it on the bench in the space between them. I didn't write this to convince you of anything. I just wanted you to know who I've become after you. She didn't touch the paper. She just looked at it. I didn't disappear to hide, she said. I disappeared to protect what was mine before the world took it too. Brandon nodded, not answering. You don't owe me anything, she continued. Not even an apology, because I saw it all before. I knew it would happen, and I still went. But I need to ask for your forgiveness, he whispered, breaking the straight line of the moment. Not for what I did just that night, but for everything I was, and that today shames me. Emily was silent. The wind swayed the branches of the trees, and for a few seconds it seemed as if even time was holding its breath. The whole world saw what you did, but that wasn't what hurt me. What hurt the most was seeing that you had no idea who I was, or who you were. Brandon lowered his eyes. He knew there was no way to retrace his steps, but he wanted, at least, to walk beside her for a moment. You don't have to forgive me now, he said. Maybe never. I just wanted to see you, hear you, and thank you. Emily took the letter, put it inside the book, and stood up. If I were to judge you, I would have done it in front of everyone. I didn't. Because it wasn't about me, it was about something bigger, and you finally understood. She took 2 steps and stopped. But I still don't know if I want someone by my side who had to lose me to see me. Brandon stood there, motionless. The reunion had happened, but he didn't know if it was a new beginning or a goodbye. And maybe she didn't know either. But that moment, however brief, was the living reflection of everything she had always been. A firm presence, truth without fanfare, silent justice. Emily didn't look for him again in the following days. She put the letter in the back of a drawer, along with other mementos that she preferred not to see every day, but that she also couldn't throw away. She read it only once. The text was honest, without embellishments, full of words that she never imagined she would hear from that man: regret, recognition, change. But still, that wasn't what determined what he would do. For her, the hardest part was never forgiving. It was deciding whether she still wanted to stay close to the person who had caused her pain, even if unintentionally. And there was the crossroads. Brandon wasn't the same anymore. She could see that. But she wasn't the same either, and now between the affection that was growing silently and the vivid memory of what had happened, she was left with a choice. The following week, she was invited to speak at a public school about dignity. The topic had been suggested by the students themselves. Emily initially refused, but then accepted. She went up on stage with simplicity, told her story without naming names, described what she felt, what she heard, what she kept quiet. She said that sometimes it is more powerful to endure in silence than to fight back by shouting. That standing your ground when everything around you tries to bend you is a form of courage. At the end, she received a standing ovation. Among those present, there was a man at the back of the auditorium sitting silently. She recognized him from afar. Brandon didn't try to get closer, he just listened to everything. And in the end, he left without being noticed. That, for her, was enough. Days later, Emily made her decision. She wrote a short note and left it on the same park bench where they had met again. The folded paper had only one sentence. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about getting back together, it's about allowing the other person to move on. Brandon found the note the following afternoon. He read it and smiled, even with the bitter taste of what would never happen. Because somehow he understood. She didn't need to be with him to change him. She had already done that. And now she was choosing to go it alone, not for revenge, but because her journey didn't depend on reconciliation to be complete. Forgiveness, in this case, was about giving him the freedom to grow apart from her. Brandon continued his projects. He quietly helped charities, restructured the way the family hotels operated, and created internal policies to hire young people from underprivileged communities. Emily, on the other hand, stuck to what she had always believed in: silent work, intact dignity, deep roots. They never met again. But from time to time, he would stop by the orphanage, leave anonymous donations, and move on. And she, without knowing it, always noticed when something changed there. A new book on the shelf, a discreet repair to the plumbing, a new rug in the bedroom. She never asked, she never commented, but she knew. And in that unspokenness between them, there was a kind of peace. The kind of peace that only comes when each person chooses their own path, without needing the other to follow. In the lobby of the new community center, built in what had been an abandoned warehouse, a glass display case held a single object: a pale blue dress with small hand-embroidered flowers, slightly stained with wine on the side. There was no sign, no caption, just the dress resting on a snow-white fabric. Children walked past it every day without knowing its full story, but they felt something strange when they looked at it, as if the piece of cloth told a truth without words. Emily never confirmed the origin of the garment. When asked, she would smile slightly and change the subject. She would say simply, "It was sewn with everything I had." And then she would go about her work, discreetly, as always. Brandon once walked past the display window. He was alone, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the embroidered fabric. He stood there for several minutes. He didn't take a picture. He didn't talk to anyone. He just stood there. He looked at it with the same reverence one might have when looking at an altar. And when he turned to leave, he seemed lighter. Maybe because I knew that some stories don't need applause or explanations. They just need to be seen and remembered. And there, in that silence between two worlds that once collided, the dress remained exposed. Not as a symbol of pain, but as a witness to everything that endured. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched you. So comment below. I also carry scars that no one sees. This shows that you felt every part of that transformative silence. Take advantage and leave a like, because this helps this message reach other people who also need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel to continue following real, intense stories that speak directly to the heart. And now, the next story is already appearing on your screen. Click and watch. You will understand why silence is sometimes the most powerful scream someone can give.